Shalom Aleichem. Today is Yod Bet Nissan, Tavshin Peh, the 12th of the day of Nissan. That is 2 days after the 10th day of Nissan, which I stress once again to remind people that on the 10th of Nissan, Am Yisrael entered Eretz Yisrael. The Jewish people entered their homeland for the first time, approximately 3,400 years ago. For those who claim that we are colonialists. And for all Jews to be aware of the facts, it is worthwhile remembering that fact, which is mentioned explicitly in Sefer Yeshua, in the book of Yeshua, or Joshua. This corresponds to the 10th of April, 2025, the Minyan HaTo'im, and we return once more to Hilchot Teshuvah, the Rabbeinu HaGadol, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimun, Zichrono Livracha, Perek Gimel. This is Halacha Yod Teth, which you should be able to see now, or Halacha Yod in other editions. So we're discussing the categories of Jews who, because of their beliefs and or actions, or lack of action, in other words, their refusal to live according to the Torah, their insistence to live in ways that are opposed to the Torah, they're just disregarding the Torah and Hashem's will, or because of their belief system, as we discussed with regards to minim earlier. There are a number of categories. So we've discussed minim and apikorusim, and kofarim b'Torah, and meshumadim. And now we come to another category, mahdi'eh harabim. So Rambam says, Ehad sheheti b'davar gadol, ki Yerovam u'sadok uvaitos. Yerovam, of course, was the king of the northern Israelite kingdom, who prevented the northern tribes from coming to Yerushalayim and joining the rest of their brethren, serving Hashem in the Beth Mikdash in Yerushalayim. He did this, of course, for political reasons, as many things in this world are done for political reasons, because he wished to bolster the legitimacy and the appeal of his operation, so to speak. If you admit that the other side has the real temple, has the real Mikdash, and the opposition are the real McCoy, and your people go there on pilgrimage frequently, then this clearly undermines your own position. So he established a kind of alternate Mikdash in Beth El, which is more or less the southern border of the northern kingdom. It's not that far north of Yerushalayim. And we also know that he formed these Eglei Zahav, these golden calves, which of course is reminiscent of something that happened many years before. So again, en hadash tachat hashemesh, there's not much new under the sun. So Yerovam is famous, and the first and most outstanding example of someone who deliberately leads Am Yisrael astray. After that, we have here mentioned Sadok and Baitos. These were the leaders of a couple of sects within the Jewish people that grew up during the period of the Mikdash Hasheni, the Second Temple period, and essentially they rejected the teachings of the Hachamim, and Mimela, therefore, of the Nevi'im who preceded them. They were more closely associated with the Kohanim and their monopoly over the Mikdash. And there was, in fact, clearly a struggle for generations over control of the Mikdash, connected to this split within the Jewish people. Therefore, people who followed these people were known as Hadokim and Baitosim. They rejected the Torah Shebaal Peh, essentially. Their positions are mentioned in a few places in the Talmud, and most of those discussions, as we see in those various examples, pertain to the Mikdash or things associated with the Mikdash, such as when is the 50th day from the Hanafat Omer, on which day do you do the Hanafat Omer, and therefore you count 50 days, and on which day do you celebrate Shavuot, etc. So they had a different position on calculating certain dates, and maybe they had a different calendar altogether. So these are classic examples of such people, but there are others, as we shall presently see. So whether these people, we're talking about a person or a group of people, people who set themselves up as teachers and mislead large numbers of people, teaching them a false path and interpretation of the Torah. That's davar gadol. Even if they only told people you do not have to perform this particular misvat aseh, this particular positive commandment. And this also includes those who force and coerce others to act against the Torah, such as Ki Menashe Shehaya Horer Yisrael Ad Ya'avdu Avodah Zarah, the king Menashe, later, long after Yerovam, in the southern kingdom, in Mamlechet Yehuda, was a very evil, the most evil of the kings of Mamlechet Yehuda, and also reigned for the longest period. And he institutionalized and coerced Am Yisrael to worship Avodah Zarah. And essentially, that period of Menashe was the more or less the last nail in the coffin of, so to speak, of Mamlechet Yehuda. Or Shehit'a Ahirim Wehidiham Ki Yeshua. Yeshua, of course, is a reference to Yeshua Nothri, Shem Rushaim Yilkav. So what we are able to understand and glean from the various sources with regards to Yeshua Nothri was that he definitely, some of his teachings and statements that are recorded, and we must assume more or less reflect what he was about. He instructed and he taught people that living according to the Torah as written and as understood and received by the Jewish people was not the ikar, and not really necessary. On the other hand, he stressed all kinds of false narratives and ideas, including claiming that he was some kind of Mashiach, and also clearly implying that he was not a human being like others. Again, this is what we understand from the sources that we have before us. We cannot be certain of everything that he did or did not do. Chazal mentioned a few things with reference to Avodah Zarah, with reference to Shabbat, with reference to demeaning the Mikdash, the Avodah and the Mikdash, etc. So these such people are called Mahti'eh Harabim. And I think we have, Baruch Hashem, today many people who qualify for membership in this particular club. Very very high prestige club indeed, with people like Rambam and Yeshua no 3. We have many such people today as well. The next category, which is Halacha Kaf or Yod Aleph, Haporesh Midarchei Tzibur. This is a very interesting and important category, because as Rambam says, Af al pi shelo avar averot, we're not talking about a person who in any way transgresses any aspect of the Torah. He lives according to all the mitzvot aseh and lo ta'aseh of the Torah. Ela nivdal me'adat Yisrael. He separates himself from the rest of Adat Yisrael, of Klal Yisrael. We'no oseh mitzvot bichlalam. In other words, he does not, he, as it were, lives independently, doesn't feel himself part of the Jewish people. He does not really bother himself too much with various dire straits in which the Jewish people find themselves. And if a fast day is declared for such a reason, he doesn't feel himself obligated to participate. Essentially, in terms of his national identification with the Jewish people, he feels and acts like a Gentile in that he's unconnected. He's not involved. He's a bystander. As if he's not one of them, of the Jewish people. Such a person, one could make the argument, I think this must be said, that the Haredi world, or at least parts of the Haredi world, could be accused of a form of behavior and existence and lifestyle, or shall we say, outlook on the world and on reality, which is reminiscent of what is being discussed here. I'll give an example. I heard some months ago a particular Haredi Rav, whose name I do not recall, and it's not important, in responding to a question where he was asked, this was, in other words, during the current war ongoing, he was asked about whether he doesn't feel some sense of gratitude and obligation or something like that towards soldiers fighting, amongst other things, for him. It's clear what would happen to him if there were not soldiers fighting against Am Yisrael's enemies. And his response, and I will admit, maybe not every Haredi would respond this way. It's quite possible. I haven't obviously interviewed every Haredi, but this is what he said, and it's on the internet somewhere. You can hear it. He said, "Why do you ask me that question? A soldier is just doing his job. That's his job, and he's doing what he has to do. Just like the garbage collectors who come around with their truck and empty the garbage cans and fixtures. They're just doing their job. I don't go out and say thank you to them. That's what they have to do. That's their job, and that's their task, and they do it. And you don't ask me if I thank them for what they do, and why should you ask me if I thank the soldiers for what they're doing?" This literally was, in so many words, that is what he said. And I think one does not need to elaborate. regarding how outrageous that response is, and how it bespeaks a complete disconnect between himself and the Jewish people. All he sees is himself, his family, and his community. People who are exactly like him. He doesn't see the other Jews at all. Doesn't feel any real connection or meaningful identification with the Jewish people as a whole. Now, I know that many people will say that is because a person such as himself views the state of Israel as either unnecessary or perhaps from its inception, by definition, mistaken, evil, misguided, unnecessary, superfluous, what have you. There are a number of different arguments and statements you might elicit from various types of Haredim who might, in response to such a question. But and I'm not debating that question right now. This pertains to another discussion which is connected to this, which is someone said to me recently that they had a discussion with a certain individual who is interesting enough. So I was told this person serves in the army in some capacity. Perhaps he's a doctor or something, but he's Haredi leaning, shall we say, or something like that. So this person questioned the fact that this is that we are engaged in a Milhamet Miswa. Why? And he said it's clear that the Gedolei Torah of the Haredi world do not consider this to be a Milhamet Miswa. And why is that clear to him? Because they do not consider this to be a Jewish state. If it's not a Jewish state, therefore it can't be Milhamet Miswa. Well, I consider that claim to be totally spurious and misguided, to put it mildly, because the definition of a Milhamet Miswa, the concept of a Milhamet Miswa is not contingent upon the existence of an officially constituted or defined Jewish state, so-called. Even if, let's say, in the time of Sefer Shoftim, up until the crowning of Hamelech Shaul, there was no Jewish state. There were tribes. Even after even after Shaul became king, it's not clear whether there really was a functioning, unified Jewish state. That probably only really happened in the time of David HaMelech, quite some time later. But the concept of is it not clear that in certain instances when wars were fought with enemies of the Jewish people, even though it was only by perhaps some of the tribes, because there was more local event, is it not clear there was a Milhamet Miswa? Let me, for example, let me stop sharing this for one moment. And I will look up something else for a moment. What we have in front of us right now is Hilchot Melachim Milhamot, Perek Hamishi, the 5th chapter of Hilchot Melachim Milhamot. And Rambam does connect it to the existence of a Melech, because he's discussing the he's including the authority and the duties of the Melech in this discussion. But Rambam goes on to say, the king is responsible when there is a king. The king is responsible. The national leadership is responsible for addressing such issues. זו מלחמת שבעת עממים, שבעה עממים ומלחמת עמלק, ועזרת ישראל ניסר שבעליהם. This third category, ועזרת ישראל ניסר שבעליהם, does that depend on the existence of a self-defined Jewish state? I don't think so. Let's say there's no state, but there are X number of Jews living in Eretz. It could be in Eretz Yisrael, and by the way, it's also true outside of Eretz Yisrael, by the way. Although it's perhaps not exactly referred to by the same term as Milchemet Miswa, but we find a similar halacha in the Shulchan Aruch also, which applies also in the Galuth, not just in Eretz Yisrael. That if there is a Jewish area and a non-Jewish area, this is based on an explicit Surya and Masechet Eruvin, and the Goyim attack the Jews on Shabbat. How do the Jews respond? So if they came whatever, they came only to steal property, then the Jews do not Mahalel Shabbat to oppose them. If they came also to attack and kill, etc., such as happened, for example, on Shemini Aseret Telshin Pedalid, then at the beginning of this war, the 7th of October, so-called, the Minyanom, well, that's clearly Aliskei Nefashot. They didn't come just to steal. And the Jews do go out to defend themselves or to fight off the enemy and what have you. This is not mentioned here. This halacha is not mentioned here in Hilchot Melachim Milhamot. It's mentioned in Hilchot Shabbat by Rambam because it applies everywhere, all over the world, anywhere on Shabbat. But is it not clear that that's a necessary, that there can be no exemptions from fighting off the Jewish people's enemies in such a situation? It is also stated over there in the Sechet Eruvin that if it's on Be'ezor Sefer, in other words, on the border area, the area which defines the border between the Jewish area and the non-Jewish area, a region which is inhabited mainly by Jews and a region which is inhabited mainly by non-Jews, then whatever their intentions, as soon as we see that they intend to or have begun to cross into the Jewish area, that is, the Jews are to Mahalel Shabbat immediately and go out and fight them off and what have you. So this is that I think is it's obviously also self-defense. It's also Ezrat Yisrael Misar Sheba'alehem. In other words, let's say that it's a particular town that's being attacked by these non-Jews, and there's another Jewish town not far away that hears about it, becomes aware of it, and can come and help. Are they not required to do so? I think it's clear they are required to do so. So this third category, at least, of Ezrat Yisrael Misar Sheba'alehem applies in all times and all places. It's certainly not dependent upon the existence or non-existence of a so-called Jewish state. How do you define a Jewish state? I also do not know. I'm not sure. Would I agree that a Jewish state is to be run and organized according to the principles and precepts of the Torah? Most definitely. But there is no, in halacha, no clear definition of a Jewish state. So, in so many words. Is this the first time in history that a large number of Jews live in Eretz Yisrael and have their own sovereign government, which does not follow the Torah? in every respect? Not at all. If one reads just almost anywhere in the Tanakh, one discovers that this was par for the course most of the time. Did anyone suggest that as therefore there was no Ezrath Yisrael Misal Sheba'alehem at that during those periods? I don't think so. I've never heard of such a thing. Although clearly not everything was being done according to the Torah. And these things varied, of course. These things, if you were to plot it on a graph, then it would be up, it would be up and down all the time. It wouldn't be a constant line. It wouldn't even be a cosine wave or something. It would be a very erratic, changeable line, which would indicate better and worse periods in terms of to what extent the government of the day considered itself obligated to follow the Torah, to what extent, if at all. There were times when obviously the governments felt no such compunction at all, such as we just mentioned before about Menashe, for example, or Yerovam, or what have you. And there were many other instances, many other periods of time. In fact, that was most of the period covered in the Tanakh. That is the reality. There was some form of Jewish government, and it was not committed to the Torah. The exceptions were David HaMelech for a long period of time, Shlomo HaMelech. There were others as well. There was Yehoash, there was Hizkiyahu. But these are precisely the exceptions, not the rule. So, a person who says, let's return to Hilchot Teshuvah, Perek Shlishi. So, a person who just a moment, I seem to have, here we go. A person who essentially considers himself to be untouched and unmoved by the situation, the circumstance of the Jewish people. And to prove the point, what Rambam just mentioned here was lo nichnas b'tharatham wa lo mit'aneh b'tha'anitham. Let's just say we had a functioning central body of Torah leading the Jewish people, which clearly we do not today. And let's say that body were to announce that due to the war and the general circumstance in which we find ourselves, this is an Eith Torah Yaakov, and therefore we have to declare a ta'anif. If that were done, I think it's clear that almost all the Haredim would not fast on that day. I think that's a fact. I don't think I'm being unkind or ungenerous in saying that. I think that's the fact. They would not fast for such a thing. They would say it's nothing to do with us. And that's exactly what this halakha, this concept of haporoshim midarchei tzibur is all about. In other words, you can think, and you may be right, that you understand what Torah Judaism is all about, and you live according to those precepts in your own personal life. You may be right about that, and you may think that there are many others who do not share this understanding and knowledge that you possess, and you may be right about that as well. And you may consider the current regime and system of government of this country to be illegitimate, and you can be right. You could be well be right about that, and I would agree with such a statement. But that does not justify creating some kind of virtual reality inside your head and within your within your view of worldview of Torah and Jewish reality, and saying zelo ma'anyan oti, zelo relevanti. It's not relevant. It shouldn't interest us in the least. I understand very well that this position, at least in part, is based on a desire to remain in every way separate from and therefore untainted by people who are far removed from the Torah in every respect. In fact, are anti-Torah in many ways. And I understand that is the reason for that kind of response, or one of the reasons. But it's also based on other things as well. That's not the only reason, and that's not a sufficient reason to adopt that attitude and to refer to soldiers fighting essentially for you as well, and not and as for others also, but not specifically for you, but for all of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael. That cannot justify referring to them or relating to them as garbage collectors who are just doing their job. And to flesh out this point a little bit further, Harav Yitzchak Shilat, Rosh Yeshivat Ma'ale Adumim, mentioned in an article that I saw that he wrote that when he was, I think he was probably in the middle of his years in Yeshivat Hesder in, I think it was in Yeshivat HaKotel, and during Milchemet Yom Kippurim, Yom Kippur War in Taushin Lamed Dalet, 1973 Leminyana, and he was involved in the fighting, and he sent a question regarding a certain halachic matter pertaining to the answer to which depends on whether it's a Milchemet Miswa or not, shall we say. He sent this question to Harav Eliashiv Zetzal of Yosef Shalom Eliashiv, and his response clearly, which is written and which was printed, clearly indicates that he considered it to be a Milchemet Miswa. So this strange individual, when this point was mentioned to him, said that, he just meant that metaphorically. Well, anyone who knew Rav Eliashiv, or anyone like Rav Eliashiv Zetzal, knows that I'm not sure he understood and knew the word metaphor, on the one hand. On the other hand, everything he said was expressed in halachic categories. Clearly, he was responding to a halachic question asked by a real world individual in a real world situation, war, and he was asked a particular question, and he related to that question accordingly. So that claim is clearly false and misleading, and cannot be considered a serious response at all. So the point to round off that point, whether the current situation is Milchemet Miswa or not, does not depend on whether there is a Jewish state or there is not a Jewish state, or how you relate to the existing state, which I myself would be happy to wave a wand and change in every possible way immediately. That's not the question. The question is, are there, in this case, millions of Jews living in Eretz Yisrael who are under attack, whose lives and very existence are, the existence of the current generation and future generations of Jews in Eretz Yisrael is endangered. Is that the reality? And that defines whether it's Milchemet Miswa or not. And this is also not in Chutz La'aretz. This is in Eretz Yisrael. So that response is completely unacceptable. And there is definitely an aspect of perisha midarchet me'atzibur in Haredi ideology. Yes, again, I understand where it comes from. It cannot be considered completely without some legitimate basis, but the conclusions and the attitudes and the actions to which this ideology and that set of responses leads are very, very problematic, shall we say, to put it mildly.
Rabbi,
Yes.
in a time when we're in a situation where there's En Shalom Wen Shemav, and a community decides to fast on one of the communal fast days, and an individual living in that community does not fast because he thinks he doesn't need to, would that be considered Poresh Midarkei Tzibur?
I'm sorry, once again, what is the situation?
En Shalom ve'en Shemav.
En Shalom, En Shemath. Okay. En Shalom, En Shalom. Yes. And
Yes.
that is the general circumstance of the Jewish people at that time.
Yes, and the community in which one lives decides to fast on a communal fast day, like on Tzom Gedalia.
Well, the question is, a community does not decide, or does it? Who okay, explain. Who is the community? Who defines or consists of the community? What does the community consist of? Who represents the community?
The city he lives in.
You mean what his neighbors decide to do? That does not define the community. Individuals can decide to do all kinds of things. In Torah terms, every community should have its own Beth Din. That's not something I'm inventing right now. That's to be found in Masechet Sanhedrin, in Hilchot Sanhedrin of the Rambam, Zedavar Pashut. A city of 120 people is supposed to have a Beth Din of 23. So, or 120 families or something like that. It's supposed to have a Beth Din, a Sanhedrin Katana of 23 Chachamim, or Chachamim plus Talmidim. So a Jewish community halachically is defined as a group of people who have a Beth Din which they follow. That Beth Din, it also depends in what country, in what period of time, etc. In other words, Shemuel says in the Talmud, "En ta'anith tzibur beBavel," which means that they do not exist in Bavel, even in his day, going back, let's say 1,750 years, roughly. They do not exist in my day, says Shemuel, neither before me, nor will this be the case after me here in Bavel. There are not Batei Din that have the authority to declare a Tanit Tzibur, which would then have certain halachic ramifications that would obligate the Tzibur, the public, etc. That does not exist. In other words, there is also the question of samchut, of authority, which devolves to each Beth Din based on the central authority. Okay, so these are all questions which need to be dealt with separately at another time. But if a group of people, Baalei Batim, decide to do something stam, that does not obligate another Balabait. This Balabait decided A, another Balabait decided B. The people with the responsibility and the authority and the knowledge to make any such determination is the local Beth Din, or a more centralized Beth Din, which is accepted by all these communities, or many communities. For example, you can also be in Chutz La'aretz, Bizman Galuth, like Rabbeinu Gerashom or Agola, who was accepted as the he and his Beit Din were accepted as the authority in northern France, Germany, England, in those areas, as is mentioned explicitly in ancient sources, such as in Kitav Yad Minchen of the Talmud Bavli. There's a list of haramot Rabbeinu Gerashom, and it mentions exactly in which countries these haramot are in effect and must be adhered to. And it mentions Angleterre, which is England, and it mentions Normandy, and it mentions certain areas. But that also means that in Spain or in Portugal or in North Africa, shall we say, Rabbeinu Gerashom was not the accepted authority. Many had not heard of him perhaps, or heard of him vaguely, but they were not really familiar and they were not connected. So his authority did not extend to those regions. At any rate, such determinations can only be made by valid Torah authorities, not by some kind of democratic vote or some general sentiment or what have you. And that is also why I think the correct perush regarding the Surya in Rosh Hashanah, in the Bavli, regarding Ta'aniyot, En Shemad wa En Shalom, Rasul Mit'anim, Lo Rasul En Mit'anim. The meaning and the intention is, as is Mefurash in the Geonim, and as Rambam writes explicitly, it's left to the individual. Each individual decides for themselves in that kind of situation. In a situation where it is Yesh Shemad wa En Shalom, then it's not left up to the individual. Then it is the decision has been made for you originally by the Chachamim a long time before, and that is that in this kind of situation everyone will fast, and the local Beit Din doesn't have to say anything right now, or the current Beit Din has no say in the matter really, because they cannot undo that gezerah and that takana. If it's an open question, if it's something which has been left to open en shemad en shalom, then it's left up to the people individually to decide. Because if it is as the Ramban explains in Torah HaAdam, which is the source of the more usual understanding, that it somehow is a communal decision, when the question is, well, who decides? Which community? Which Beit Din? Which area? In this province, in this area, there may be a certain halachic authority, or a Rav, or a Beit Din who said such and such a thing, but it could be that 100 miles away another Rav thinks differently, or their situation is objectively different. So it's and how exactly does the Sibur decide? Do they take a vote, a plebiscite? How is it done? This is very unclear and difficult to make sense of, frankly. So I think the position of the Geonim and the Rambam, that it's an individual decision, was the intention, and that is something which can work. It's comprehensible. All right, let us end with the following halacha, which is halacha kaf aleph, or a continuation of yad aleph. Ha'oseh averot b'yad rama kohoyakim. He who deliberately transgresses the Torah in a demonstrative way, b'yad rama, in other words, le'inei kol, in other words, publicly, deliberately, as an act of rebellion against Hashem. Ben she'asa kaloth, ben she'asa hamuroth. It doesn't matter even what kind of avera. En u'halek ra'am haba. In other words, if you wish to be a avarian and a mardan and a rasha in your own personal life, well, there's no one really who can do much about that. At least much of the time, it's in your own hands. But if you do so deliberately, you go out of your way to make everyone aware of this fact, then that is no longer a personal matter. That is a national matter. The Jewish people are being affected, negatively impacted by your actions. The people are likely to learn from such an example, and therefore eno halek ra'am haba. Wazeho nikra meghaleh panim b'Torah. This is a term from the Mishneh, Masechet Avot, which is often misunderstood because of the addition of the word Shilo Halacha, which is not the original Nusach, not the original Girasa at all. Mechaleh Panim B'Torah means exactly this, to be brazen-faced, as it were, with regards to the Torah, and to deliberately act in opposition to, in the manner which is diametrically opposed to the Torah, deliberately, in order to make a statement. That is Mechaleh Panim B'Torah. Mipnei she'ha'ez misho. As you see here, the Rambam says, Mechaleh Panim refers to being Me'iz Panim, Az Panim, like it says in the Mishnah over there, Az Panim L'Ge'enom. Mipnei she'ha'ez misho v'chila pano v'lo bosh midivrei Torah. And it seems that we have many such individuals, again, today, who qualify. At any rate, I must end here for today. Hayu beruchim. חזקו ויאמץ לבבכם, כל המייחלים לאדוני, שנזכה לקיים, לחגוג את חג המסות, חג הפסח, and let us hope that during the days of Pesach we may hear בשורות טובות, ישועות ונקמות וגם נחמות. היו שלום שלום. כל טוב לכם, שלום וניצחון.